The Brewery, beneath the orchard, Missouri, 1891. Clara Bennett inherited a farm that everyone told her to sell. The land itself was good. That was not the problem. The problem was fruit. Her father had planted almost 9 acres of apple trees years earlier, believing the growing towns nearby would provide a reliable market. But transporting fresh apples was difficult. Every autumn, the orchard produced more fruit than Clara could sell. Perfect apples went to market, damaged apples went to pigs, and hundreds of pounds simply rotted. One October afternoon, while repairing a collapsed section of fence at the edge of the property, Clara noticed something unusual beneath a hillside. A stone wall. Most of it was hidden behind vines and soil. After clearing away brush, she found a narrow wooden door. Behind it was a building she had never known existed. Part of the structure had been built directly into the hill. There were 2 large underground chambers lined with stone. Iron hooks hung from the ceiling. Wooden shelves had collapsed along the walls. At the back stood the remains of several enormous barrels. An elderly neighbor eventually explained what Clara had found. Decades earlier, before the farm belonged to her family, German immigrants had operated a small brewery there. Before mechanical refrigeration, brewers needed naturally cool places to store beer. So they built cellars underground. The brewery eventually closed. The wooden buildings above ground disappeared. The underground chambers were forgotten. Clara immediately noticed something. Outside, the autumn afternoon was warm. Inside the cellar, it was cool, very cool, and the temperature barely seemed to change. Clara did not know much about brewing, but she knew apples. She carried several baskets underground and placed them on makeshift shelves. Weeks passed. The apples remained firm. The fruit stored in her kitchen deteriorated much faster. Clara began experimenting. She repaired the ventilation shafts. She built wooden racks that allowed air to circulate around the fruit. She sorted apples carefully, removing damaged ones before they could spread rot. By the following year, the abandoned brewery had become an underground fruit storehouse. Instead of selling her entire crop immediately after harvest, Clara stored much of it. When other farmers had already exhausted their fresh apples, Clara still had hundreds of pounds. Winter prices were considerably better, but she soon discovered another opportunity. Local farmers had the same problem with potatoes, carrots, cabbage, onions, and other crops. The cellar was enormous, so Clara began renting storage space. A neighboring farmer stored potatoes, another stored barrels of cabbage, a merchant stored cheese. Hunters occasionally paid to hang meat temporarily in the coldest chamber during cool weather. The old brewery became something remarkably close to a communal refrigerator decades before most rural farms had mechanical refrigeration. Then Clara took the idea further. Not every apple could be stored. Bruised fruit still spoiled quickly, so she purchased a small cider press. Instead of feeding damaged apples to pigs, she pressed them. Some juice was sold fresh. Some became vinegar. Apple pulp went to livestock. Almost nothing was wasted. Within several years, the farm had changed completely. The orchard was still there, but the business was no longer simply growing apples. It was storing food, processing food, and selling crops when everyone else had already sold theirs. Farmers began scheduling harvests around available space in Clara's underground rooms. Wagons arrived carrying sacks and baskets. Records were kept showing whose food occupied each rack. A small packing shed was eventually built outside the cellar entrance. Clara's father had considered the orchard the valuable part of the property. Yet the most valuable thing on the farm had been buried beneath a hill the entire time. A brewery that had failed decades earlier became the reason the farm survived, and Clara never brewed a single barrel of beer. She simply recognized that the previous owners had solved a problem she also had, keeping something cold without electricity. The building had lost its original purpose, but the idea behind the building was still useful.